And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominick, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, would my creepy uncle stop going to the local high school swimming pool if I bought him an emotional support animal? And with the supply chain crisis rolling on, will post-Thanksgiving sales be the Bombas slipper purchase craze we've all been waiting for? And now, the podcast host who would never dress his dog in a pet costume unless there's a viral video involved, Pete Dominick.
Well, that is absolutely right, Pete Co. You've nailed it once again, as you do every day. I will do anything to go viral in a video. I mean, I am an entertainer after all. Welcome to Stand Up. This is episode 470. Joining me today, longtime listener and now a contributor, official contributor to the show, Dr. Watt Lesley Black of SMU. He's a PhD in education, and as well as he's a legal expert. And he was great. Had a really interesting conversation. Learned quite a bit from him about what educators are supposed to be doing, what parents can be expecting to happen in school, the legal precedents, and so much more. It was great to get him on the program for the first time. And Essie Cupp is also a guest on the program today. She never disappoints. We had a great conversation about a wide range of issues that she's been writing about at the New York Daily News. Also, of course, host of her own show on CNN. And we're very lucky to have both these guests here on the program today. And that is part of the attraction of this show, are the guests, of course, a big part of it. And the fact that I have access to all these folks and their numbers and their emails. And if I don't, I find it and I get them on and my reputation precedes me, which is really cool. And people almost always say yes. You tell me who you want me to hear on the show, standupwithpete@gmail.com. If you're not already a stand-up community member, what are you waiting for? Sign up now. It is Thursday as I tape this, so if you are a member, you can join us at the Stand-Up Happy Hour Hangout Thursday. That's tonight at 8 East. You get an email in your box with a link to the Hangout. It's always a great time. So looking forward to that on Thursday night, of course, every Thursday. All right, well, lots to get to. I did something different. Two different things that I did on Wednesday. I woke up and I went right out into the woods for a walk with the dog and my friend and his dog, Ken Zatz, I mentioned yesterday. Shout out again. He's my daughter's pediatrician. If you have a child and you live in Rockland County, you should take that child to Dr. Zatz. He's a legend. And we took dogs off the leashes. I've never done that. And I was in the woods on a crisp autumn morning, and it was just a great way to start my day. Highly recommended if you haven't done that. Get out there and give it a shot. And then the other weird thing I did, or different thing I did, was I went to a junior high football game. I watched boys play football. I went alone. No. My daughter's boyfriend and a whole bunch, all her friends are playing, and it was the rival teams, and I liked it. It was fun. I've got all kinds of, plenty of problems with kids playing football at that age. It's probably wrong, but it was just a beautiful night. I'm really loving autumn, maybe more than ever before. I don't know, something about this year. I'm so enjoying it. I hope that you are wherever you are. I am glad to have you here joining me. Lots to get to in the news, all kinds of reactions to the elections last night. Depends on who you like, who you trust, but I'm going to give you a bunch of takes and a couple of other clips. That's what we're going to do tonight. Hot takes on yesterday's election. It's time for the last 24. All right, well, let's start with the spin from Rachel Maddow on MSNBC last night, laying out pattern how it has gone for presidents and the states of Virginia and New Jersey, who also always have their elections a year after presidential elections.
And when I say that normal electoral politics does have a sort of normal ebb and flow, I mean it emphatically. I mean, in terms of what happened last night, consider this. The first year that George H.W. Bush was president in 1989, his party lost the governor's race in Virginia. And then his party lost the governor's race in New Jersey. The first year Bill Clinton was president in 1993, his party lost the governor's race in Virginia. And his party lost the governor's race in New Jersey. The first year George W. Bush was president in 2001, his party lost the governor's race in Virginia, and his party lost the governor's race in New Jersey. The first year Barack Obama was president in 2009, his party lost the governor's race in Virginia, and his party lost the governor's race in New Jersey. And yes, in the first year Donald Trump was president, in 2017, his party lost the governor's race in Virginia, and his party lost the governor's race in New Jersey. The Virginia and New Jersey governor's races always happen a year after presidential politics. And they always follow the same pattern. A lot of things in politics are subtle, nuanced, complicated. This is not one of those things. Every year, after a new president is elected, his party loses the governorship in Virginia and the governorship in New Jersey. And this has been true all the way back through the 1980s. Last night, it would appear that like every other president in living memory, and admit it, a few of those presidents you even forgot about, it would appear that last night the same thing just happened to Joe Biden that has happened to all the other presidents like clockwork, like it's written in stone. Everybody freak out. I mean, the only one difference here for Joe Biden is that he only lost one of the governor's races. The Democrats only lost one of them. As we just learned, NBC News has just called the New Jersey governor's race for Democrat Phil Murphy.
All right, well, Chris Hayes had something similar to say the hour before on MSNBC on his show.
And in the last 12 gubernatorial elections in Virginia, only one has been won by the party holding the White House, which was, ironically enough, Terry McAuliffe's narrow victory back in 2013. Here's the basic situation. When a party is in power, as the Democrats are in the White House, it often mobilizes the opposition party. It's part of the political gravity that is held for decades. I mean, heck, look back to the 1930s, all right? 1934 aside, which was an anomalous situation, when the Democrats under President Franklin Roosevelt got absolutely blown out in the 1938 midterm elections. That's after they did all the New Deal stuff everyone loved. The man was so popular, he was elected president 4 times, and even he suffered the same kind of political backlash to his presidency that we're seeing last night.
Now let's go to reporter Yamiche Alcindor asking President Biden what he thinks Democrats need to do or learn from the elections yesterday.
What should Democrats possibly do differently to avoid similar losses in November, especially as Republicans are now successfully running on culture war issues and false claims about critical race theory?
Well, I think we should produce for the American people.
He thinks we should produce for the American people. If you get something done, maybe that'll make a difference. All right, here's Vice President Kamala Harris with a hot take.
Are there messages for the Democratic Party heading into next year's elections based on what you saw in New Jersey and Virginia?
I'm going to leave that to the pundits, but I will say this. We had great wins, as well as obviously what we talked about in Virginia, and I celebrate those. We have Eric Adams in New York. In Ohio, we had with Miss Brown, Chantel Brown, a great win and a great, I think, what will be a great addition to the United States Congress. So, as I said, I supported Terry McAuliffe, but I congratulate Mr. Youngkin, and we will keep doing what we need to do. And on the issue again of voting rights, we're going to keep fighting.
All right, here is the, I think, second or third most powerful Democrat in the Senate. It's Dick Durbin of Illinois and his reaction.
Well, the results yesterday in Virginia, maybe New Jersey as well, were disappointing but not surprising. I think Terry McAuliffe has been saying for weeks that his fate was tied to the progress of negotiations here on Capitol Hill. And there ought to be a clear message to my party and all those who support it to get the job done. We've spent enough time talking, enough time thinking, and enough time suggesting to America that good things are coming. Now we've got to prove it.
All right, that's Dick Durbin saying something similar to other elected Democrats. You got to get something done for the American people if you want them to vote for you. Here is the raging Cajun James Carville. He was on the PBS NewsHour. He blamed wokeness for Democrats' electoral struggles. Let's take a listen to James Carville.
James Carville, to you, looking at these results, your party, what went wrong?
What's wrong with this stupid wokeness? All right, don't just look at Virginia and New Jersey. Look at Long Island. Look at Buffalo. Look at Minneapolis. Even look at Seattle, Washington. I mean, just defund the police, lunacy to take Abraham Lincoln's name off of schools. I mean, that people see that. And it's just really have a suppressive effect all across the country. The Democrats, some of these people need to go to a woke detox center or something. I mean, they're expressing a language that people just don't use, and there's a backlash and a frustration at that. And I'd be right, suburbanites in Northern Virginia, suburbanites in Northern New Jersey, pulled away a little bit. Youngkin never ran any ads against Biden. And I think what he did is just let the Democrats pull the pin and watch a grenade go off and own them. And we got to change this and not be about changing dictionaries and change laws. And these faculty lounge people that sit around mulling about, I don't know what, they're not working. Look what happened in Buffalo. Again, Seattle. I think that Republicans may win a city attorney's race in Seattle. The autonomous zones. Who could even think of something that stupid? And they're suppressing our vote. And I got news for you. You're hurting the party. You're hurting the very people that you want to help. And Terry got caught up. He's a good friend of mine. He's a good guy. He got caught up in something national, and we got to change this internally, in my view.
Well, I'm not sure whether or not you agree with James Carville. By the way, he got really dressed up. He's wearing a hooded sweatshirt and a hat on PBS NewsHour. A weird guy. Worked with him at CNN. Weird guy. All right, here is Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, who is the chairperson of the Congressional Progressive Caucus on CNN, who, with Anderson Cooper, who gave her a tough time, a bunch of tough questions, asking her, this idea that is the left to blame. By the way, I would say for not getting something done sooner, maybe, but it's not the policies. You might think of James Carville has a point in terms of language policing and all of that, the defund the police stuff. Okay, I mean, I can understand that argument, but it's not progressive policies that I think are turning any voters off or not turning them on. Well, here it is on CNN last night.
Congresswoman Jayapal, you saw what happened last night. Do you take any blame in this?
Anderson, it's good to see you. Look, I think that the whole issue that we see from voters last night is people do need help from us, and that's what we've been working to do with the president's Build Back Better agenda. It is really transformational, and I think the cries for help in the midst of an economy that was handed in tatters to the president, that we have actually worked to fix since we've come into power in the House, the Senate, and the White House. We cut child poverty in half. We got shots in arms. We got money to small businesses. But obviously, Anderson, this was a 2-year pandemic that the Republican Party did not take seriously, and we're still climbing out of it. I mean, there's no doubt about
you're saying people last night were saying that they need help. It doesn't seem like they're asking you, progressive Democrats, for help. It seems like they're asking now Republicans for help, even though you say Republicans botched the vaccine rollout. I mean, Republicans did well last night.
They did. And I think part of that is, look, we have to pay attention to local politics. And I think that Democrats are the party of parents, not Republicans. We are the ones that are looking to pass universal child care, universal pre-K, to cut prescription drug costs. And as soon as we get that done, I think people will see that and we'll be able to, really show people that we have their backs. I mean, the timing of this was obviously awkward, but I really believe that this is what happens in many elections when you have one party take over 3 and off your elections. This is not abnormal. And I think that we will get through the next, this doesn't mean anything for the midterms. That's not to say we shouldn't take it seriously. We absolutely should.
You don't think this means anything for the midterms?
Well, I just think we have to take it seriously, but it shouldn't be projected to be a loss for the midterms. What we have to do is turn the ship by passing these two bills, and I think there's increased urgency to do just that. There is real unity in the Democratic caucus around passing both the Build Back Better Act and the infrastructure bill, and I hope to be able to do that this week.
Well, we'll see. We will see. Lots to talk about with the congressional negotiations as well. So much going on this week for sure. But over on Earth 2, where nothing matters at all, here is Hannity and Laura Ingraham as one tosses to the other. And isn't it great how Laura Ingraham, or however her name is pronounced, calls Hannity Hannity?
There's no doubt. But Hannity, don't you think that some of the Italian vote in New Jersey got a little sick of the attacks on Christopher Columbus? I'm sorry, nobody's talked about that, but I have a lot of friends in Bergen County, and they're like, people were killing each other. It was a horrible time. But they really took offense to the attacks on Columbus and Columbus Day. I know it's just a small issue, but I kept hearing that all day long from people.
When
so I just thought I'd throw that out there.
It was. And I know you had the Republican candidate on Ciattarelli like we did, and it was so close. I'm like, this is a tsunami election. Now, Republicans, though, they got to get their act together. They got to run on platform, and they've got to mean it and stand behind it and fight for the principles.
That's right, you bet. They got to mean it, and they got to stand behind it, and they got to fight for their principles, which is just going to be constant culture war bullshit about some dude putting on a skirt, going into the women's restroom and sexually assaulting somebody chasing a senator into a restroom and trying to get her to ask questions. I mean, just that's the platform. Those are the principles. More of that certainly is effective. And here now on MSNBC, Chris Hayes talking to Dr. Anthony Fauci last night about how to convince parents to get their age 5 to 12 age kids vaccinated. And I thought this was a good 2 minutes.
I am not a parent who is reluctant, hesitant, worried about giving my kids a vaccine. In fact, I'm one of those who's going to do it as soon as possible. There are parents, I think, who are vaccinated themselves, who are not generally vaccine resistant, who may feel a little more concerned, anxious about kids. Parents tend to be a little more, worried, anxious about kids, what goes in their kids' bodies. How do you think about the messaging there and about the patience and what level of uptake you're anticipating?
Well, first of all, we absolutely have to respect the concerns of parents, because parents are going to have valid questions. And it's up to us in our communication to answer those questions and to make that information available widely. I mean, you want to have trusted messengers. Some of the best trusted messengers in these cases would be pediatricians or family members or people who have had vaccination as an adult and can talk about the results. The data are very clear, Chris, the efficacy data and the safety data. Our FDA, particularly when it comes to children, are very, very scrupulous in figuring out whether or not we have a benefit-risk ratio that's favorable to the benefit, and they clearly came out with that. And that's the reason why they authorized it, and that's the reason why we had a 14-0 recommendation from the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, whose job is to look out for both the safety of the children as well as the protection from the vaccine. So we got to get that message across to parents and not put down or be put off by their very, very valid questions. We like them to ask questions. We believe we have the data to back up the answers.
All right, there you go. There is Dr. Fauci last night on MSNBC with Chris Hayes. And finally, here's one more clip for you. This is from Jimmy Kimmel Live last night on ABC, because it has been a year since the election, and I thought this was pretty funny. There is, I will tell you, trigger alert, there's some Trump clips. There's some clips of Trump, but it's good.
But today's a notable day. Today marks 1 year since the presidential election. Can you believe that? It only seems like 10. Remember a year ago we wondered how long Plumpty Trumpty could keep being a sore loser? Turns out the answer is forever. And Joe Biden a year ago said he ran for president to restore the soul of America. Well, I'm not sure if we've had our soul restored, but we did get the McRib back, which is it's kind of a start. Things aren't great, but they could definitely be worse. In fact, on this 1 year anniversary, let's look back at the many times Donald Trump warned us of what would happen under a Biden presidency.
If Joe Biden became president, China will own this country. If Joe Biden gets in, your Second Amendment is gone. Your 401ks and money itself will be worthless. No city, town, or suburb will be safe. Religion will be gone. Okay? Life, you could forget about that. The economy will collapse. The market will crash. The chaos and bloodshed will spread to every community in our land. We would have the greatest depression in the history of our country.
Well, good calls, Nostradamus. You got every one of those right, isn't it? Remarkable.
All right, Jimmy Kimmel on ABC last night. And finally, I do want to play a couple of, I think, uplifting clips here at the end before I get the headlines. You've got some glass ceilings were broken in cities like Pittsburgh and Cleveland and Boston. Of course, still waiting to see what happens in Buffalo with our friend India Walton. But listen first to from the next mayor of Cincinnati, Aftab Purival, a Democrat, speaking about his parents immigrating from India after being elected to the first Asian American mayor of Cincinnati.
They came to this country to provide a better life for their two sons, my brother and I. And I don't know if they envisioned a night like tonight, but I believe that because of that incredible decision, my family went from being refugees to now the next mayor of Cincinnati.
And here is sound from the first black mayor of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This is Democrat Ed.D.
But let me tell you why this is beautiful. Because you proved that we can have a city for all. You proved that everybody can change. We know how people have talked about Pittsburgh, have talked about how silo it is, how segregated it is. But today, you changed that. You changed that.
And here's the first woman of color to be mayor of what some people say is the most racist city in the country. New Boston Mayor Michelle Wu, a 36-year-old city councilor who backs things like rent control and free public transport and a city-level Green New Deal. Let's listen to Mayor Wu.
From every corner of our city, Boston has spoken. We are ready to meet this moment. We are ready to become a Boston for everyone. We're ready to be a Boston that doesn't push people out, but welcomes all who call our city home. We're ready to be a Boston where all can afford to stay and to thrive. And yes, Boston is ready to become a Green New Deal city.
Well, there you go, Mayor-elect Michelle Wu. Okay, well, I'm going to wrap it up there, and now I'm going to skip the news dump, and now I'm going to pull back the curtain to tell you why I'm doing that, because as some of you might know, I had a catastrophic loss of the podcast last night after working on and editing for 5 hours and then saving it. I restarted my computer, which is running a little glitchy, and I went back to get it, and it was gone. It was gone. I left it right there, and somebody stole it from me. I don't know what happened, and I don't want to bore you, even if I did explain what happened, but I called CJ Eichinger, who taught me everything about how to technically produce this podcast. Is constantly on top of me when there are sound issues, because he's a listener, he's a subscriber, and he is an amazing friend for all he has helped me with. I texted him last night. He got back to me early this morning. He put his day and work aside. He found today's podcast. Yes, indeed. Today's podcast is brought to you literally by CJ Eichinger. He might as well handed you today's podcast. And so we celebrate CJ, and he's not on social media, but we're going to find a way to thank him. We'll give him a standing ovation and a hangout. I don't know, because there's so much I owe to this guy. And the bit, because he's very funny now, is in any little way he asks me to help him, which he has like a couple of times. Like, can you help me put this door up? I tell him that I'm busy. I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't. He lives nearby, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned that. We live in the same community here in Rockland County. So he'll be like, hey man, can you come help me move this couch? I'm sorry, I'm busy. Can't. He's given me like 1 million hours of his time, expertise. He's saved me so many times. So, yes, in lieu of a news dump and putting that together, I can reuse Pete Coe's great jingle for next time. And now I will get to my interviews, which are great. Okay, so coming up from SMU University, Dr. Watt Lesley Black Jr., we talk education. I ask him a lot of questions. He has a lot of answers. But first, it's always great when we get to talk to S.E. Cupp. It's even better when we find something to disagree about, which we did today in terms of the outcome of the Virginia election and what happened there. And so we had a great conversation. Of course, well, I don't tell you about the conversation. I'd just rather play it for you. S.E., of course, is a host over at CNN. She has been on all the major news networks over the years. I've worked with her and known her for a long time. She's awesome on Instagram and Twitter. You should read her column at the New York Daily News. Always love reading what she's writing. And I mean, I so enjoy our conversation. So follow her on Twitter. Let her know that you heard her here at SE Cupp. And here we go. Lots that I want to talk about with you. Thank you for joining me. Hi.
Hi. Good to be here as always.
Happy anniversary. You've been public about your anniversary on social media. You were married 8 years.
Yeah, 8 years ago on the 2nd of November, we got married.
But together, as you told me right before I hit record, for 10 years. How should it be counted? How do you count it with him?
I mean, we definitely talk about having been together a decade now, which I feel like is a great thing to celebrate. But I also loved our wedding day, and I want to celebrate the day we got married too.
I clicked on his alternative Instagram. He's got his personal Instagram, which is more about maybe him. I didn't really do that one, but then he has another one, which is his outdoorsy stuff. Are you familiar? You know this, right?
Yes, I'm familiar. Yes.
And I went and I looked through a lot of the pictures, probably for several minutes, and on his Instagram feed alone, I'm fairly attracted to him. I like the way
the appeal, right? You see what I saw.
Well, yeah, he seems I don't know, rugged and manly. I like that.
Yes.
But I like an outdoorsman. I like a man who knows his way around the outdoors.
Mm-hmm.
And all his pictures are about him on the water and fishing and hunting and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, he was raised with that. So this is how he was brought up, shooting, fishing, and he was raised in Rhode Island on the beach and with hunting and fishing and shooting in his family. And so this is how he's grown up. And I know he feels very fortunate that he gets to keep doing that and also pass it on to our son as a tradition,
Yeah, he's a New England. He's very committed to New England, it would seem.
It's a brand. It's a thing.
Yeah, I like it. Well, hey, speaking of brands, you have created a new brand. It so minimizes what you've done. But you basically came out and wrote a piece at the Daily News, which is outside your normal purview of commentary on culture and politics. This was very personal about your own personal mental health challenges. And then you've been tweeting about it really openly. You and I have talked about it. You tweeted on my birthday eve. You tweeted, "It's incredible what happens when you tell the truth about your mental health. Not only is it a cathartic and liberating release, but you create a whole new community of people who share their stories, their tips, experience, advice, and you learn you're not alone." And I just shared that and said, I have learned that myself. I'm so happy that you're doing this. You're on a panel. You're doing stuff. I'm so happy you're doing all of this with your life and career. It's great. Congratulations.
Thanks. And I'm glad you're framing it that way because I'm celebrating it too. And I think it would be easy to look at what happened to me, right? I mean, I had a nervous breakdown basically. And my mental health really got out of control. It'd be easy to look at that and think, what a terrible thing. And it was terrible. And I it's terrible whenever someone is hurting. But it's been such a gift to work through it, learn a lot about myself, learn a lot about the world and navigating it better. And then also meet so many other people and hear their stories. And like I said, you learn you're not alone, which is such a comfort.
Yeah.
But you learn tips and tricks and, helpful ways of navigating the world that we used to think, well, I've got to figure this out for myself, which is bananas. That's bonkers. I mean, not to get help, we're taught everything at a young age. Why wouldn't we want to be taught how to be mentally healthy?
Because, you know why? You answer that.
Why?
Because to be mentally healthy, I mean, I don't know what the answer is. My answer is because to be searching for mental health is to be admitting either publicly or even personally to yourself that there's a problem. And number two, you might look weak.
Yeah.
And so my next question to you is, well, first of all, I think it's really great that you're doing it. I completely agree with everything that you just said, the tips, the advice, the not going through it alone, the learning new things. This morning, I took a walk with a guy who's, let's see, like almost 15 years older than me. We become good friends. And we went for a walk in the woods on a Wednesday morning. I was like, that's a thing you can do with another person? What? It was amazing. I'm like, yes, I want to do this the rest of my life with you, sir. But I want to ask you about the difference between men doing what you kind of have done, which is like, so me in terms of admitting and writing and talking about your public challenges, publicly, your mental health challenge, and women doing it, because, I wonder what you think the difference is, if there's a difference. What if your rugged husband did this?
Well, I hope he would, if he, were going through those kinds of challenges, especially since I've been so open and we've created such a safe place to have those conversations. But I mean, I can only say how I've been treated, and I've been treated very well in terms of my sharing these stories. But before I went through this, I covered these stories. As you know, I covered Naomi Osaka's, admission of mental health struggles, Meghan Markle's, Simone Biles. I covered these, and I covered them because I didn't like the way other people were talking about them. I didn't like the way, for example, Megyn Kelly was talking about Meghan Markle and Naomi Osaka, calling them weak, calling them spoiled, entitled, all these things that just make it harder for normal people, not famous people, to come out and admit that they're going through something. And it just perpetuates those awful stigmas. And so I think there is a tendency among some to see this as weak or entitled or self-indulgent, maybe especially when women do it. But I think every day those stigmas are falling away, and we're getting closer and closer with every passing minute, and every celebrity that comes out, every person that comes out to say, I'm not doing well. I think a lot of those stigmas are falling back, which is so great.
Yes. And because people like you and are talking about it openly, it's really important. But, I want
to get to the point that we talk normally about it, which is why I start some of my tweets with, like, my therapist just told me,
yes,
right? Because I want to normalize that in conversation, that it's not weird to say in passing, oh God, I was just talking to my therapist and you know what she said. That should be a normal thing. We should be able to laugh about therapy. We should be able to learn from therapy, talk about it, share, like you talk about any other part of your life. That's where I want to get.
Well, I will say the one interpretation I have on I love my therapist told me tweets. I love them. As soon as I see it, it's like my favorite thing I'm reading this one. But I will say one of my takeaways is, how often do you talk to this person? Another tweet about what your therapist, like, did you just, how, do you call her and get like one piece of advice and then share it? Or do you spread it amongst the week? How are you?
I spread it out because I have to process everything she has said. I talk to her once a week. I talk to this therapist once a week. And I talk to another doctor once a week. One is managing my medication. One is a talk therapist, is managing my health. And I have to process everything she has said. So I write stuff down. I internalize it. I try to, I challenge it sometimes. And so when I feel good about something she's just said and I've wrapped my mind around it, then I share it and I put it out into the world.
I think you should just like be a little bit dishonest and use the "my therapist told me" thing for anything that you learn that you want to share.
I think it's really smart.
Yeah, like if you're just talking to a friend or something and they say something, give you a new perspective, you can throw that under "my therapist told me." I'm here for that. So
it's instant credibility. Yeah. I mean, it's instantly believe it and trust it.
You're yeah, exactly. You're doing a thing at the can I say this? Is this private? The can edit it out. The Counseling Center of Bronxville and the Reformed Church thing?
You can say it.
Yeah. Are you moderating this conversation?
No, I'm a panelist. It's a conversation on mental health that's sponsored by a counseling center in Westchester. And so there will be a number of therapists, some physicians there to talk and answer questions. I will be on a panel. And then there's another young woman who has also gone through some mental health challenges. She'll be there as well. And it's a very frank, hopefully, conversation about mental health and, the stuff we're all going through.
I love it. I love that you're doing that. And I got the invitation. I might even show up.
I hope you do. That'd be great.
So I want to talk about that all the time with you, but I've got a few minutes left, and I want to talk about your recent commentating, your recent columns at the Daily News, and thoughts on things and stuff.
Good. I love things and stuff.
Thoughts on things and stuff with S.E. Cupp. And you can read more about it at her column on the Daily News, all of which are so great. Always love reading what you're writing about. Even I haven't paid attention I'm turning away from the Alec Baldwin tragedy. I shouldn't say the Alec Baldwin tragedy. I should name the victim, right? What's her name? And because it's a terrible accident, it looks like a thing that happened to one guy. But you write about it from a point of view that did make me want to read about it, which is that Alec Baldwin, he's basically, he is a very unsympathetic character. Couldn't agree with you more. But yet, this is a tragedy, and a lot of people are trying to score points. There's a lot to talk about in terms of the degradation of moral decency in our country, and we could talk about it from a lot of different points of view. But that's the point you're making here, right?
Well, there's a number of points. That's one. Why can't we just see people as people and not political avatars? Look, I've had my own political run-ins with Alec Baldwin. We don't agree on stuff, and he disagrees not nicely. I mean, he's a very, he's been very personal and but that doesn't matter. This has nothing to do with politics. Why would you wish this tragedy on anyone? He's responsible for the death of a mother. I mean, and innocently. He did not do this on purpose. This was not his fault. It wasn't his job to secure the gun. That is horrific. And I can't imagine what he and his family are going through. There's also an innocent victim in this, Helena Hutchins, and I think exploiting her death to score political points is really gross. But I think, from another point of view, as a gun owner and gun rights advocate, to sort of make light of an accidental shooting, that is something responsible gun owners lament. We do not delight in this because accidental shootings are tragic, yes, but also terrible for gun rights. I mean, that's something we have to confront all the time and defend gun safety, and that you can own guns safely and use them safely. Well, to see Donald Trump Jr. dancing around because Alec Baldwin had an accidental shooting is terrible for gun owners, and he should know better. I know he's an avid hunter and gun owner. He and I have talked about that many times together. And it's just a terrible look from that perspective.
Didn't he sell a T-shirt or something like that?
Yeah, he made T-shirts and sold them on his website. He's profiting off of this horrific tragedy.
And then you have the two guys running for Senate in Ohio, Republicans, Josh Mandel, and J.D. Vance, did they both weigh in some horrible way on this?
Yes.
They did? Yeah, you wrote about it. But I read.
Yeah, I mean, it's just despicable. And I came up against this too after the insurrection. I don't know if you remember, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez admitted, she talked about how afraid she was that day.
Yeah, I remember listening to it.
And then admitted she had been the victim of a sexual assault separately. And that sort of triggered all of those emotions. And I thought, my God, the only way to receive that is to feel terrible for her. And yet, plenty of Republicans called her a liar, said that she was sort of faking it, wanted attention. She was, again, this sort of entitlement idea. And I just thought, oh my God, we have really lost our way if that's how we greet that story.
I think that leads us into another piece of yours at the Daily News, which is really good and super important about the situation between Pete Buttigieg and his husband, Chasen. Mm-hmm. They've just adopted twins. They were apparently born premature. I know all this from reading your piece. And the point that you're making here is that there's been a lot of criticism that he took leave and that he is, you can talk about some of the other criticisms that have been made outside of that, but it all ties together with the fact that, you're saying that folks who are anti-abortion, you make a lot of points in your own point of view on that, should be so for adoption. But the problem, however, is, S.E., are you more for adoption or more against gay people being married? Or specifically, if I'm bending my back over to give them credit to their argument, gay people adopting?
Well, exactly. And I've never understood this opposition. I've been talking about gay adoption for years from a pro-life perspective. I mean, I believe that Roe v. Wade is settled law, and I don't think we should overturn it. And I think abortion should be legal, safe, and rare, like most people. But I think abortion is awful, and I don't envy anyone who has to make that horrible, tough decision. And I know it's a tough decision for women. I don't envy that. But if I lament abortion, well, then don't I have to appreciate and celebrate any family that wants to adopt children, and especially, I think, two gay partners who cannot conceive. And so therefore, adoption is really, one of the best options. And these are people who are desperate, just as they were desperate to get married, which is why I supported gay marriage. They're desperate to be parents. And why wouldn't we want people who are desperate to be parents to be parents? Those are the people you want raising children. And so I just didn't understand why Pete and Chasen weren't heroes of the far right for adopting kids and then wanting to, spend time with them when they were born. Like, why isn't this something the right is celebrating? And I know the answer, hypocrisy, of course, in politics, but it bothered me.
Is it hypocrisy? Is it that one issue is somehow supersedes the other? Like, I don't think gay people should be allowed to have kids, adopt kids, because of the arguments that they make, which is, it should have a male and female role model. The traditional family is the right way to do it. I mean, and so
look, I think there's some of that. There are definitely some pockets of that. But I think when Republicans looked at Pete, they saw a Democrat, and that was it. They forgot their principles, pro-family, pro-life. They forgot all that because they saw a Democrat, again, who's just an avatar, not a person, just an avatar, a political avatar. And that's how we treat people now. That's what politics is about. It's about identifying enemies instead of friends, identifying heretics instead of converts. That's what politics has become.
I want to ask you about what happened in the elections around the country. Obviously, different elections, different cities, states, and obviously towns, boards of education, judge. It's a lot to talk about. Local matters most, and I hope people are paying attention locally. As tough as it is. I mean, local media is so bad I couldn't find the results on, the judges in my town. It took me, I had to go to their own Facebook pages. So that's pathetic, and I want to do something about that locally. But so I wanted to ask you a broader question of how you feel about this issue regarding what's going on in schools, what's being taught in schools, and specifically as it relates to, you just mentioned, we're talking about LGBT issues, and I've been very involved in my local situation, and it's traumatizing, it's terrifying because they're in some schools they're taking down rainbow flags and Black Lives Matter flags, and the kids who identify as gay or as queer are terrified because that to some extent was their safe space, because at least they knew they were, quote, welcome. And now when you take down the sign, when you take down the flag, now it feels like they're being pushed back in the closet. So what do you think is happening right now? How do you feel about what's happening in schools and this movement with parents?
Well, like so many other things, I think we're playing politics with our kids, and we're exploiting, I think, real tough issues for the sake of politics. Obviously, that's not, that's an obvious point, but I think that's what we're doing. And look, I think there are what happens in all of this is the nuance gets lost. You know, Glenn Youngkin in Virginia is a racist, apparently, because he wants parents to be notified when sensitive topics are being discussed at school. I don't think that makes him a racist. And the example that he was given was Toni Morrison's Beloved, and the examples he was discussing were sexual violence and bestiality and some very tough things that I don't want taken out of school. He didn't either. Those things can be taught at age-appropriate levels, but I do as a parent would like the opportunity to discuss that with my kid, and to do that I have to know that it's coming up in school. And I don't think that's weird. I think it's weird to oppose that as Terry McAuliffe did. I think that's a very odd hill to die on, and as he probably agrees this morning. But I don't think that's controversial. Now, there's other stuff that is controversial and that's being exploited, racial fears and all of that, which I think is lamentable. But I think when it comes to parents' rights, I can't imagine having the gall to tell Virginia voters that they should not have a say in their kids' education, as Terry McAuliffe did. I couldn't imagine it.
I heard it differently.
Go ahead.
And I've been really involved, and my mom's a teacher, and I work with a lot of teachers. And it's like, what are you asking for? That you want the English teacher to send you an email and say, we're reading Beloved, and there is this and this and this? Because I'm not asking, like, I trust my daughter's teachers in 10th and 8th grade that they've chosen age-appropriate material. And I have such a relationship with my daughters that we'll talk about everything pretty well. I have access to my teachers to ask them any questions. Like, this whole thing is a bullshit thing.
For you.
No, for you. Because you have not, you're not concerned. You're not involved in the day-to-day assignments of your son, and you won't be. You won't be. You'll trust your teacher. You'll basically trust the school until there's an issue, and then you'll address it.
It's not an issue of trust, though. I want to be aware, and there might be issues that I discuss differently with my kid. Issues around religion, issues around sex, issues around morality, and there's nothing preventing me from having those conversations. But I want to know what he's coming up against that might sound different, not because I'm afraid of it, but because I want to contextualize it and discuss it with him. And I think it's fair to tell parents, we might be tackling some tough stuff today, or this is what we're covering in these books. I would like to know that. It's not because I don't trust them. It's because I want to be completely.
But but that is what happens. That's exactly like, this is all a made up thing. Like, teachers do talk to the parents.
But the bill that Terry McAuliffe was discussing would prevent that from happening. That's why it came up in a debate, because for some odd reason, he doesn't think that's appropriate. And you're right. It's not a big deal to send a note home saying we're going to be, tackling some tough stuff. That is what happens, which is why it's very weird for Terry McAuliffe to say, I don't want parents being informed that way because it's not their say. And guess what? Glenn Youngkin agreed. He said, I also agree the Board of Education sets the curriculum, but parents should be informed of some of the sensitive stuff. I don't think that's out of bounds. I don't think that's a boogeyman.
I have no idea what you're talking about, so I can no longer argue it. I'm looking it up. I mean, just when I'm not trying to look like an asshole, a jackass. McAuliffe vetoes bill permitting parents to block sexually explicit books in school. So that's just the headline at the Washington Post. That's different than notifying them. Blocking.
And that's not what Glenn Youngkin said he wanted. He said, I'm not for banning books, and I think the curriculum should be set by the Board of Education, not parents. He was not for banning books. He wanted parent notification. Again, I'm not addressing what some people want. I'm addressing what this candidate wanted, and perhaps why he won is because what he wanted is not crazy, and what Terry McAuliffe was saying sounded crazy.
I'm going to read into this, and I'm going to argue with you.
Okay, good.
But
because we don't do that a lot. It's fun.
You and I?
Uh-huh.
We used to before we knew each other better.
Yeah.
And I like now I like you as a person so much that I'm scared that an argument mishandled, it just wouldn't be worth the overall relationship because of so much of the stuff that we certainly talk about and have gone to trust each other. It's just not God forbid I would say a thing that would be like, oh God, that was dicky, you know, I do worry about that with someone like you, not with. So, but I
know what you mean. Yeah.
But my big point has been, you mentioned this. If you're teaching religion, if you're teaching your young children that they're going to die or be damned to eternal hellfire if they don't follow the rule of the word of the Lord, and yet you're afraid that they're going to learn about sex and slavery, you are you're
no,
not being
I explicitly said not because I'm afraid of it. I'm not afraid of that. I always meet knowledge with more knowledge, and let's learn more about it. And absolutely, I want my kid to learn everything, know everything about everything. And I might have an opinion on bestiality or rape that I want to convey to my son as he's reading about it in a fictional context.
Well, let's dig into it. Where are you on bestiality?
Here's where I come down on bestiality.
I have a strong opinion on it, which has always been, I think as long as it's consensual.
I think that's fair. No, I mean, you know what I mean? My right as a parent, that's the only thing I get to retain until they're grown-ups is indoctrinating them with my viewpoints. And I mean, I'm kidding about that, but seriously, the way I want him to think about religion, he doesn't have to be an atheist like I am, of course, but I don't want a teacher telling him, like you said, he's damned to eternity and going to hell if he doesn't. I don't want that happening.
For me, there's way too much of this. The teacher is indoctrinated or telling him or her. That's not how school. That's not. I mean, it is. You could pick examples. But school, certainly in high school, the teacher's never telling you anything. They're bringing up a subject, a book, a theory, and then the students debate it. They're assigned to debate it, to argue it. It's teaching them how to think. I love that. It's indoctrinating them, ideally, at best, public school, indoctrinates kids how to think.
Ideally. Yeah.
Ideally. But there's also an agreed upon code of conduct. And I think that's really disconcerting because I'm afraid, Essie, that we don't agree on the fundamentals of what we should expect from behavior in school. Is name calling okay now?
Not to me. Is it okay to you?
It all depends.
Okay. If it's clever.
I mean, I teach my girls that, there's certain situations. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, if you're attacked, you got to humor is I have a lot of theory. No, but I mean things that we generally agree on, bullying. All right, well, I'll let you go with the final question, which is what advice do you have? You're not going to want to say. I was going to say, what advice do you have for Joe Biden? I'm trying to tie into your piece about Joe Biden, your latest, Joe Biden being a placeholder. What do you think Democrats can or should do right now? Because it really seems like there's nothing they can do to get these two senators on board and to stop being so inconsistently consistent. What can Democrats do to recover from?
Accept reality. Accept reality that we have an intransigent Congress, and that goes for within the left as well as left versus right. And accept the fact that we elected Joe Biden to serve one term. I think that's where most of us came in and thought, because of his age, because of all of these factors, mitigating factors, he probably isn't going to serve 2 terms. That's okay. He's not a transformational figure. He's a transitional figure. That's fine. Start building your bench, Democrats. Start building your bench and looking to the better candidate to run in 2024. Accept it. It's okay. It's nothing to be embarrassed or ashamed of.
I appreciate that advice. I think it's something everybody should be thinking about for sure, and doing it locally as much as possible. S.E. Cupp, always a pleasure to cover so much ground with you. I really appreciate it. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Always enjoy our conversations. Thanks.
There she goes, S.E. Cupp. Let her know you heard her on the show today. You appreciate her perspective and her honesty and vulnerability. And I can't, it's always great when she's always so good to promote the show and super helpful and a good friend. And while you might have differences with many things that she says, as I always have, I still feel very strongly about a lot of people who I don't agree with on quite a few issues. And I love engaging them to talk about where the differences are. So if that's one of you and you support this show, I'd love to hear from you. And maybe we could have a conversation, a respectful, thoughtful conversation. I think we can still do that, can't we? Some of us with each other, maybe, sometimes. Okay. Well, let me get to my second guest who's joining us right here on the program for the very first time. He's been a longtime listener. We've engaged on social media several times before, but I dug a little deeper into his background through Twitter because he always makes such smart comments and found out that he's a big deal. He's a clinical professor in education policy and law, and he teaches at, well, he's taught at all kinds of different places, but at SMU right now in Texas. And he's got so many different, and I can go on and on about this guy's CV, but he's been a principal and I believe a superintendent and trains them and so much more. And I really think you're going to learn a lot from my conversation with Dr. Watt Lesley Black Jr., who, by the way, is on social media and he's great on Twitter. I love his tweets. You can follow him at Watt Black, W-A-T-T Black. All right, well, I had a lot of questions for Dr. Watt Black Jr. down at SMU, and so now it's time for me to ask them. Here we go. All right, I've got him now. I'm assuming he is there in Texas at SMU. Dr. Watt Lesley Black Jr., welcome to Stand Up for the first time ever. We are very excited to be in your classroom, if you will.
Thank you, Pete. It's an honor to be at the table with you. I've been listening to you for years and enjoy your work and enjoyed many of the guests that you put on the air. And so really pleased to be here, and it's an honor.
Yeah, well, yeah, it must be probably the honor of your entire career. I mean, I've read your whole bio, and your kids are all grown up, but I would imagine this is better than anything you've ever done.
Oh, yeah, absolutely better than any. Yeah, a podcast with Pete Dominick is I'm hitting the heights.
That's it.
I've never hit before. Yeah,
that's it, sir.
So yeah,
you've peaked.
It's all downhill from here, Pete.
Well, you have had like let's just talk about your career because you've kind of you've had a lot of different. You have a lot of different expertise and specializations. And I think for me, when it comes time to talk about education, I think it's great to talk to health policy, or rather education policy experts and professors and academics. But when it comes to education, if you're a decision maker, if you're in charge, I would like you to have some time in the classroom. Tell me a little bit about your career in the classroom. And if you agree with me that in-classroom experience is invaluable for people who are going to make decisions on education.
Absolutely. I agree. I started as a high school teacher back in the early 1990s, I guess 1990 or 1991. I was teaching German and social studies in a high school environment and spent 7 or 8 years teaching before I moved into administration. And I was a high school assistant principal and an associate principal, and ended up being a middle school principal for 8 years. And while I was doing all that, I was working on my master's and doctoral work and developed an expertise and an interest first, then an expertise in school law and the way the law impacts education. And when I moved over to the academy, I guess it was 2012 when I moved over full time to the academy, but I've been adjuncting and teaching college level courses for several years before that. So I spent 20 plus years out in the field doing K-12 work. And so I think that helps me in the classroom with my students, because my students are all in the field now. They're teachers, they're principals, sometimes central office administrators. So it helps them be in the classroom and learning some of this sort of abstract content that they have to learn with someone who's been out in the field and done the work and can explain to them how it's going to manifest in practice.
Let's get to one sexy, provocative question, and then I'm going to ask you about how law affects education. And politicians and pundits like to water everything down. So that's what I'm going to try to do to you with this question. Then you can decide whatever you want to do with it. But how much, the question is, how much responsibility should parents have, or do parents have, in what their children learn in public schools? Because that is kind of what is being debated right now. And I find that conversation bizarre. I always love when parents are engaged, when they know the teachers, when they have questions for the teachers, the educators, and the administrators. But now we're kind of having this conversation where parents seem to think that they're going to have like decision-making power over what books are taught or what happens in the classroom. And some of that is because they heard their kids learning last year, remotely, which is kind of out of context. But a lot of it is, what the latest outrage. And I just wonder what you think about what the answer should be in terms of parents' responsibility and role when it comes to specific curriculum.
Well, I will start by backing up, jumping up to the 30,000-foot level a little bit. And I think it's important as educators that we do recognize that parents have a constitutionally protected 14th Amendment liberty interest in directing the upbringing of their children, which includes being involved in critical decisions and educational decisions. And there's nothing in the Constitution specifically that says that. But there are a couple of cases dating back to the 1920s. Of course, the Maher versus Nebraska case in 23 and Pierce versus Society of Sisters in 25. And, I can get into the details of those cases if you like me to, but I won't now. But I will say that those cases had to do with the rights of teachers to teach foreign languages in the Maher versus Nebraska case. And in Pierce versus Society of Sisters, it was really sort of around the right of private schools to exist. But what came out of those classes and what came out of those two cases, and one of the reasons we study this in my classes, is that there was some dictum, some language in the cases where the judge or the court said parents do have some level of authority to direct the upbringing of their children, which includes decisions like opting out of the public school and into a private school, or asking for their children to have access to useful information like a modern language other than English. So how far does that right go? The states have a pretty clear interest in designing and putting together the curriculum. So, I think to suggest that the interest that they have that's constitutionally protected means they get to write the curriculum or demand what should be in and out of the curriculum, that's a stretch. But there is a constitutionally protected interest there. And so from my perspective, as a former practitioner and training current and future practitioners, is we need to be working as much as we can with parents and helping them understand their role in partnering with the schools and helping move the work forward and make decisions related to their children specifically. Most state education codes have pretty well-developed sections that talk about the rights and responsibilities of parents. And in Texas, for example, and this is pretty typical, parents have the right to opt kids out of specific topics that they object to, but not completely out of courses. And so it's a balance, and parents do have rights, and we have to accept that and work with that and honor that. But at the same token, parents need to understand that the state does still control the curriculum. There's democratic accountability there. They can vote for their state representatives, their state legislators, their school board members. And there are democratic accountability pieces in there for parents to exercise a greater level of involvement in controlling what's going on in the schools. But that parental right, I don't think, extends so far as to single-handedly dictate what should or shouldn't be in the curriculum, or even, small minorities of parents dictating what should or shouldn't be in the curriculum. As a matter of fact, that in most states, that's really more of a state function than a local board function anyway, what's in the curriculum.
Yeah, I was about to ask the state's role and responsibility. I mean, if you get into it, each state has a pretty different education curriculum and policies, which is, one piece of evidence, I suppose, to help folks understand that is why colleges recruit from other states and say, oh, well, this student was educated in New York State. They have a higher standard or something like that. How different does each state's decision making from the next one, the policies that affect educators and students the most?
Well, I haven't done an in-depth study of all 50 states' education codes, but I will tell you that there are differences. There have been differences. I think some of the differences we've seen in terms of what you're referencing or referring to, which sounds to me more like differences in standards and expected outcomes and the rigor of state tests and state standards, and that would lead us to conclude that students educated in one state may have a leg up on students from another state. I think that's part of what we have been trying over the last 20 years or so to address, even more than that, through things like the Common Core, right? Is sort of standardizing some national, putting in some national standards in place. And that work started way back, with Bill Bennett in the Reagan administration, who talked about a confusing patchwork of standards. But I think now we have a much more uniform curriculum from state to state. There's the majority of the states have adopted Common Core curriculum in reading and math, and here in Texas, the Common Core is illegal in Texas. We can't adopt it, but our state standards are not dissimilar from what you would find in the Common Core. So I don't know exactly the intricacies and the differences from state to state about all the pieces of state code. So I probably should pass on that.
That's a good answer, nonetheless. Yeah. And so wait, real quick, are guns allowed in classrooms in Texas yet? Where are we on that?
Well, no. There is the debate in Texas, like everywhere, about arming teachers, and there have been some districts in more rural areas that have put in place sort of the Marshall programs, where they may have certain teachers who might be armed, but wow. No, guns are not allowed in the classroom. No, it's still in the discipline code. If you get caught with a prohibited weapon or a firearm, if you're a student, you're in big trouble.
Okay, well that's I guess good. Okay, yeah. So what about the history of the other big hot topic? I just wanted to get to weigh in from a 30,000-foot level is kind of the history of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. My mom, well, that was Oedipus. That was Oedipal. My mom was a public school teacher, and she thinks about inclusion, diversity, equity, and inclusion from her standpoint in the 80s and 90s. Mm-hmm. When she thinks about inclusion, she thinks of that really representing children with learning disabilities and trying to mainstream them in the classroom so that they feel included. It's better for everybody, for the resources, for the whole school. One could argue is an experiment. It seemed to be very successful, as a matter of fact. But she's thinking about it in terms from learning disabilities standpoint. But now it's very much focused on in terms of ethnicity and black versus white. But I mean, was this always controversial, or did it recently get controversial? Because when I was growing up, in school, and like I said, my mom being a teacher, this was something that was, at least from my vantage point, my opinion, my own experience, not controversial and great.
Right. Yeah. So the word inclusion in education circles for many years, if you said that word in inclusion, the word inclusion, it would have triggered the same thoughts that your mom had. Inclusion in the sense of the idea that the special education law, the law that protects students who have disabilities. And you're right, that was about getting them to the greatest extent appropriate. And some students who have disabilities can be fully mainstream with peers who have no disabilities, and others might be in more self-contained kind of situations in what we might call a special ed class for a portion of the day. So that's sort of what your mom is thinking about. But you're right, in recent years, when we talk about equity and inclusion, it has a completely different connotation and a different meaning. I will say that when you talk about the legal sweep and what's been going on in public schools around diversity for the last now 70, 75 years, since Brown versus Board of Education,
you're right,
and Brown was 1954, and it took many years for us to start seeing progress. It's not like Brown was decided and the next day schools were magically integrated, and they still aren't, in the truest sense of the word, I think, across the board meaningfully integrated. We had a lot of resistance, and this is I'm not saying anything that most of your listeners don't already know, but there was lots of resistance to the Supreme Court's decision in Brown. And it took a lot of court intervention, subsequent intervention of the court, to push remedies that meaningfully integrated schools. And I think that sort of peaked early in the 70s with the Swan decision that sort of endorsed busing as a remedy. And busing, of course, was deeply controversial. And then the court began to change into the 70s. Some of the Nixon appointees and into the 70s and 80s, the court began to change. And the court began to sort of back off of desegregation remedies. And then eventually the court started disintegrating court orders. And so school districts were when they were no longer under court orders, typically what happens is the integration goes backwards in that district. And so what we've seen really over the course of years, and Gary Orfield is the expert on this out at UCLA, is sort of a resegregation of American schools. You'll see school districts that are diverse, but you'll drill down to campus level and you see the campuses are not quite as diverse. And there are a lot of students, particularly in urban settings, who go to schools that are, as Gary Orfield calls them, apartheid schools. They're 99% one race or 99% minority. And, that's just 1% better than what we had before Brown versus Board of Education. So wow. We've seen kind of a backslide in certain areas and the demographic trends have changed. But part of this is also tied up in the way the courts have treated affirmative action. Bakke case in 79 and leading up through Grutter and Bollinger in the early 2000s, and most recently the Fisher cases dealing with higher ed admissions, and then the case out in Seattle that dealt with K-12 and race-sensitive admissions. So schools right now school districts really can't do anything affirmatively to increase diversity in on their campuses if it's race-based. So the things that they have to do are typically going to be socioeconomically based and zip code based. And here in Dallas, there's some campuses that are called 50-50 campuses where it's supposed to be, an even mix of socioeconomic demographics on the campus. And so that it's left the schools with fewer tools to achieve sort of a meaningfully integrated system. And that's something that I've kind of followed for the last 20, 30 years, but Gary Orfield's the real guy you need to talk to about that.
I'm looking at his stuff right now. He looks great.
Yeah.
So in lieu of not being able to have policies that actually desegregate schools, rather segregate schools, that they're more desegregated now, and to integrate, I think is the word I'm looking for, right?
Right.
So, I'm new to this conversation, apparently. In lieu of that, like a lot of the efforts have been in kind of programming and around the edges to create an understanding and education of the differences that we have amongst us, especially when there's a minority of students. And so that's a lot of what the kind of diversity and equity programming is. You bring in a speaker, you have different programming, you have different schools of thought that are presented to students so they can understand things. And that seems to be what is being combated right now. How do you see what's happening in classrooms across the country with the issue, the pushback? I mean, first of all, people are equating CRT and diversity, equity, inclusion. I just want to get you on the DEI efforts in school districts in Texas or anywhere else and what they have looked like and how they've changed.
Well, I think, first of all, every school district in their mission statement and their vision and value statement is going to have some sort of, it has for some time now, some sort of statement about diversity and equity.
Yeah.
And so it's part of all of our school districts is sort of woven into the vision of the school district and the mission of the school district, and has been for some time. The extent to which systems actually honor and act upon the things that they put in their mission, vision, and value statements, I think depends upon the system itself, right? We sometimes put things into those kinds of foundational documents and then we don't think much about them anymore. But clearly, after the spring of 2020 and the incidents that occurred with Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, there were the high profile incidents that that really spoke to people and fired people up in a way I think that some of the other previous incidents hadn't, just across the board. And I think school districts everywhere, colleges, corporations, all organizations at that point were looking at what they were doing and being reflective about their systems and being reflective about their culture and opening up some dialogue with people within their organizations and people impacted by their organizations about what can we be doing differently? How can we move forward together on these kinds of issues and make progress? And so, I think a lot of the political pushback that we've seen has been a response to that surge forward in equity and inclusion and diversity work. And the folks that have been doing that political work have done a pretty masterful job at frightening people about certain things. And I'm not a critical race theory specialist. I really didn't know anything about it until it started hitting the airwaves in the last year or so. But I do know that there's been a sort of a strategy of lumping anything that's equity, inclusion, diversity oriented into this bucket of CRT, and it's CRT, therefore it's frightening and bad, and we can't do it. And even things like social emotional learning, which is something that I've had an interest in for the last 10 years or so, I've seen put in some of these, form letters where people are saying, here are the red flags, the code words to look for to know when your school district is promoting.
I'm really sorry to hear that. I had not heard that at all. Yeah. My wife was actually teaching mindfulness in schools for one semester and social and emotional learning. Who is it? Daniel Goleman, I think it is. Right? And John Kabat-Zinn. There's been so much great work on that, and you've got champions in the U.S. Congress even now, like Tim Ryan, and the data on it. You can talk about how effective it is, and so it's. If that's a casualty of this, well, everything, my opinion is that everything gets watered down to talking points, and then people get afraid of what's being said, and they misinterpret things. But if someone were to say, they're teaching communism in my kid's school, I would say that sounds like what you do in school. Right. But it's how it's said, meaning if you're studying economic theories in social studies or whatever class would be appropriate, then you talk about all of them. You talk about all of the economic theories. If you are studying religions, you talk about all the religions, sex education, and so on. And then it becomes a conversation about age appropriateness and all of that. And so my question to you is, how do you handle that in a nuanced way, and explain to parents in a way that this is what teachers do. This is what's supposed to happen in school. This is what they learn.
Well, a few days ago, Pete, you tweeted something that, and I'm paraphrasing you, but you said that the teachers don't indoctrinate. Teachers teach students to think, and that really resonated with me. And I thought you were really onto something. And I think in that one little tweet, you were almost stating a sort of a philosophy of education, and I call it the marketplace of ideas ideology for education. And that's, Justice Brennan back in the 60s in Keeshian versus Board of Regents, he called the classroom peculiarly the marketplace of ideas. And he said that the nation's future depends upon leaders trained through wide exposure to that robust exchange of ideas that discovers truth out of a multitude of tongues rather than through any kind of authoritative selection. And when I hear people talk about indoctrination, indoctrination implies that we're trying to get people to accept, buy into a certain set of ideas or beliefs or values, and to do so unquestioningly and uncritically, without thinking.
Right.
And so what Justice Brennan is saying with marketplace of ideas, and I think what you were saying when you talked about teachers teaching students to think, is that we put the ideas out there to them and we teach them how to think. And we are, since the 1960s and 70s, education's been all about cognitive levels, and every teacher out there, your mom probably knows about Bloom's taxonomy of learning, right? The levels of cognition that we want students to go through. And every teacher who's been evaluated has had an evaluator come in and ask questions about what do you do to get the kids above just rote memorization and facts and knowledge and up into analysis and evaluation and creative thought processes? That's what we're supposed to be doing. And in order to do that, we have to hit them with this marketplace of ideas. And so it's possible to teach about things without endorsing things or indoctrinating students in ideas. And in fact, teaching critical thinking skills is, I don't want to use the word vaccination in today's political climate, but it inoculates students from the possibility or the likelihood of being subjected or successfully subjected anyway to any form of indoctrination. That's the deal, Pete. When you teach kids to think, they're way harder to indoctrinate if that's what you're trying to do, because they know how to, as Justice Brennan said, discover truth out of a multitude of tongues. So, but not everybody really agrees that embraces those ideas with the same level of enthusiasm, because there are still a lot of people out there that believe that the main reason we have school is just to inculcate values. Justice Berger in the 80s in Bethel versus Frazier said that schools must teach by example the shared values of a civilized social order. And that's an important function of schools too, but it gets more dicey when we get there, because the question is, whose values are we going to embed? And so typically in schools, when we're inculcating values, it's things that are non-controversial that we can all agree on, like respect and honor and civility and cooperation and those kinds of things. So, but I guess I don't know if I'm really answering the question, Pete. But I think
definitely are. You definitely are. No, you're giving a. Yeah. I mean, you could go on. I'm patiently. Yeah. I'm really intently listening, because I think the point that I think the best point that you make is whose values. And that's right. That's seemingly where we are at right now. And so the next, kind of maybe question to talk about, or the hot button verbiage that you hear a lot is also like the smart argument that people try to make is, listen, I'm okay with it, but it's got to be age appropriate. Uh-huh. And my thing is, again, me listening to the show, like I'm not going to tell somebody how to do their job. Whether it's a teacher or a truck driver or a research scientist, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to ask them, hey, how do you do your job? When it comes to education, I am not going to, at least up until this point, I have not ever been concerned that my daughters have been exposed to something that isn't age appropriate, because I think they think deeply and do tons of research about what is age appropriate, subject matter, books, and so on. Like I'm sure a lot of parents, maybe even some listening, would disagree. But like, well, no, I don't agree with that. Well, okay, well, you go ahead, make the case. But what do you say to that argument about? I think it should be age appropriate, because my answer is it is age appropriate. They think long and hard and do a lot of research and even pass laws about what's quote age appropriate. Right.
Well, I mean, and that's in the process of developing curriculum, and that's what the experts in curriculum development and child development are tasked with doing. And in Texas, for example, the State Board of Education is given the charge of developing what they call the well-balanced curriculum, the state curriculum, and they're supposed to do that with the input of professional educators and parents, and so there's stakeholder input in coming up with the curriculum to begin with and determining what's in the curriculum. And then from there, things that are supplementary to the curriculum, what's in the library, what's in the school library, for example. These are things that are put together by the library, the media specialists who they have training in what's age appropriate. And so it's not one person just making the decision. It's always stakeholders. And if parents challenge something in the library, most school districts have policies and systems where they put groups of people together, experts and parents and various stakeholders to review that material and determine, is it educationally appropriate? Is it suitable for elementary library or middle school or high school library? And so I think, again, that if we go back to this parental right to control the educational upbringing of your child, you do have that, but that doesn't give you the unilateral right to impose your opinion of what is or isn't age appropriate on the school system, because those decisions are made systemically and they're made by getting input from stakeholders as well. Another example of that in Texas, Pete, is the School Health Advisory Committee. For example, state law says that it has some stipulations on what we can and can't teach in terms of human sexuality. Texas is one of those states where we have to teach an abstinence-only approach. But in addition to that, every district has to have a School Health Advisory Committee, the SHAC, we call it the SHAC Committee. And it stipulates the types of people, the people that need to be represented, or the groups that need to be represented, and their parents, their educators, their health professionals. And those are the people that are determining, in terms of the health and human sexuality and health curriculum in a particular district, what is and isn't age appropriate. So I guess what I would say to a parent who questions a specific piece of material or book or subject is that they should find out what the process is in their district and see if they can get involved in that process and just be part of the process, not the singular voice that's demanding that their point of view be the dominant point of view, but get involved in the process and understand the way it works and the considerations that go into making decisions about these sorts of things. It's not random.
Yeah, I think parents don't think about it. I think they really don't have too many parents have no understanding. You and I were talking the other day off the air, no understanding about what administrators, educators learn and what goes into the decisions that are made, as you said, systemically on all of this stuff. And they just come in and they say, what are you doing? What are you teaching? And then they cherry pick a line from a novel that sounds provocative or something. You're teaching my kids this, and it's almost like, do you think we haven't thought about this?
And to be fair, I'm sure there are circumstances, and where a parent comes in and says, "Why is this here?" and everybody involved takes a closer look and says, "It's a good question. Why is this here? And do we need to reconsider this?" But that's the way the process is supposed to work. And generally speaking, if a book's in the library, it's there because experts looked at it and determined it had some sort of educational value. And they placed it there for a reason. So if a book is in the curriculum, it's being read for a reason. And you may have a legitimate objection to it for one reason or another, but talk to the people in the school district that are charged with making these decisions and find out why do they think that this particular piece has educational value. That's what I'd always do when I was a principal. If I ever had a situation where parents have a statutory right in Texas to exempt their child from, as I mentioned earlier, from a specific topic or a specific book, if they don't want their child to read a particular novel, then they have a statutory right to get an alternative assignment. But I would typically ask the parent to meet with the teacher and the curriculum coordinator and talk about the book and what their objections were and hear from the professionals why we read this, what we hope the kids will get out of it and what's the value of it. And I don't think there was ever a situation where the parent didn't say, "Oh, all right, well, I'll trust you on this. Let's try it. And if something goes wrong, we'll revisit this." So people are reasonable most of the time. At least they were in my practice. And I know over the last several years, things feel like they're just none of us are nearly as reasonable as we used to be. And I don't know if it's just the impact of the last several years and the pandemic and people being shut in the house and just mounting frustration about everything. I don't know.
I reject it. I think I'm more reasonable than ever before.
Okay. Well, you've always been a beacon of reason, Pete. So.
You know what? I don't know if you've heard my new show, Beacon of Reason.
Beacon of Reason. My
new band, Beacon of Reason. So the kind of just getting a broad overview and introducing you to our audience. And it's so great to have someone who has got your background expertise that can contribute to our discussion and help us learn. And so generally speaking, with your background, obviously, and understanding the legal decisions that have determined so much of this, right now we're talking a lot about race and racism and the history of our country. We're also, you kind of, I think, touched on tangentially, at least, sex ed and certain things that have sexual connotations in them novels and so on. But I just wanted to get your take on religion. And because, you're hearing an argument being made by a lot of folks, and certainly on the religious right, that we need more religion in school. And then you've got a lot of other scholars and certainly a lot of liberals who will say, well, this country was founded on the separation of church and state, or we've got Supreme Court decisions on such things in terms of religion in the schools. And finally, we have religious schools. We have them. If you want to pay extra, you can send your kid to one, and you can teach your kid whatever that they're going to burn in eternal damnation if they don't follow the word of the Lord while they're 4 years old, and then be worried that they might find out that Thomas Jefferson raped teenagers. But that's up to you. You could do whatever you want. But what does the law say, and what do you think about the conversation about we should have more religion in school, not no religion or separation of religion, or as I like it to call it, really what it should be, examination of all religion in any way you want in school?
Well, and back to a point you made a moment ago, Pete, is there's a difference between teaching about ideas and promoting ideas. We need to be teaching about the religions of the world, and there's a definite difference in teaching about religion and indoctrinating or endorsing or coercing students around any idea related to religion. But we need to be teaching about the religions, and we do teach about the religions of the world. The role or the religion in schools, just in general, is probably the most enduring and ongoing and still very confusing areas of dispute, I think, in public education, and also areas of misunderstanding. And it's really these two clauses in the First Amendment, the Free Exercise Clause and the Establishment Clause. Congress shall make no law regarding the establishment of religion or the free exercise thereof, and how these two clauses seem to sort of work against each other. If you worry too much about establishing a religion, about not establishing a religion, and kind of keeping that wall of separation there as a school administrator, then you're going to run the risk of people feeling like you're being hostile to their religious beliefs, and that's problematic. On the other hand, if you're too accommodating to religions or to any one religion or set of religions, then you run the risk of offending the Establishment Clause as well. So those two clauses, I like to think of them sort of like counterbalancing weights on a teeter-totter. I always have this image of a common playground activity in my mind, this teeter-totter that's with equal weights balancing on each side. And if you put too much weight on one side, it throws the other side out of balance. And I think the real struggle for school administrators is in state neutrality, is in remembering that they're state actors and that we want to be neutral with regard to religion. So my approach is sort of the way I think about it is that when you're truly neutral, often you're upsetting everybody equally, right? I mean, if you ever had a parent who tries to make sure they are completely neutral with their kids, both kids are going to say you love the other one better. Mom always loved you better. No, mom always loved you. And true neutrality, I think, always feels to each side like they're getting the short end of the stick a little bit. But that's just a personal observation. What I would say is, that there is so much misconceptions, so many misconceptions. For example, when people say prayer has been taken out of the public schools, that's not true. Kids can still voluntarily, non-disruptively pray inside the school anytime they want. Over the last number of years, Pete, really the last 30 years or so, I think the teeter-totter is tipped towards free exercise more and more. We've had a litigation strategy in the Supreme Court of sort of bundling free exercise rights with free speech rights. So it kind of creates a double team of two rights against the Establishment Clause. And so things have been tilting that way. The court's turned, more conservative over the years. And we've seen some legislative things that have occurred. For example, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which was the piece of law that the Hobby Lobby decision was based on. And it essentially applies strict scrutiny to any kind of state action that might burden religious beliefs. In Texas and in some other states, we have things called anti-religious viewpoint prohibition acts, basically. The Texas Anti-Religious Viewpoint Discrimination Act. And what that does is it protects kids' abilities to talk about religion in their schoolwork, as long as they're addressing, the core of the assignment, that they can, if they're asked to write a paper, they can include their thoughts about religion if it's appropriate for the assignment. Gives them the right to elementary school students, the right to form organizations. It requires school districts in Texas to create a limited open forum. It places where events where students may speak, like graduations, which protects their right to express themselves religiously in a graduation and a commencement address. And as a matter of fact, it protects not only the religious expression rights, but it protects their speech rights in general. And like the Equal Access Act is another example, Pete, the Federal Equal Access Act that says if high schools allow any kind of club to form on campus that's not curricular related, like, and by curricular, that's like, you teach math and you have a math club, that's a curricular club. But if you have you don't teach yoga and you have a yoga club, that's a non-curricular club. So any club you allow to open up on campus and be recognized, if you do that with any club, you can't discriminate. And so it was the Equal Access Act. The purpose of it was to give greater access to Christian clubs forming on campuses. But the effect of it has been that it's advanced all sorts of student speech interests and associational interests. And probably the group that's benefited the most from the Equal Access Act are LGBT students who now have that legal protection to be able to form organizations on campuses and get recognition. But eventually, we have to move back to the Establishment Clause. And I think the Establishment Clause is getting overshadowed a lot these days by free exercise. And the point I always like to make is we can't allow the Establishment Clause to be completely weakened, because the Establishment Clause doesn't just protect it's not there just to keep religion out of the government. It's the other way around. It's to keep government from interfering with schools, right? And so both of the clauses, even though they seem to kind of work against each other, they both protect religious freedom, right? If the Establishment Clause is gone, if the wall of separation gets completely knocked down, there's not going to be any religious freedom after that. So people have to remember that both clauses are important, and both clauses have to, they work together, and
be careful
they depend
what you wish for.
Right.
If you are,
right.
A very religious person that is objecting to what goes on in schools. Oh gosh, so fascinating getting your perspective on all of these issues because of your legal education as well as your education experience. I've been writing the whole time you're talking, all these different court cases and clauses. Santa Claus.
I'm sorry. I can go on a little bit on some of this stuff, Pete. I apologize.
No, I'm really into learning a lot more. Yeah. Now, finally, and most controversially to me, I'm kind of joking and I'm kind of serious. I realized or found out that some states in the United States of America in 2021 allow for teachers to hit children. Corporal punishment is legal. Is it in Texas? Is it allowed?
Yes. Yes, it's legal in Texas.
What is the academy? What does the academy say? What does the research say about how this is effective for behavioral? I don't know even why. This is. I mean, you can still hit teachers. How does it work? A teacher can paddle. They call it, like they somehow act like it's not. They can hit a kid with a goddamn piece of wood in school. I mean, it's. Have you ever hit a student with a paddle?
No.
You have not.
No.
Do you have a paddle just in your office, just in case a kid?
No. The district where I worked in, we didn't use corporal punishment at all. It was a district policy. So districts can still, and most of the more urban districts, I think, have disallowed corporal punishment, not all of them in the state of Texas. And most of the corporal punishment that occurs in the country occurs across the South, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida. There was the famous Ingraham versus Wright case where kids in Florida at a particular school were badly beaten, and they sued alleging that corporal punishment was cruel and unusual punishment. And the court said, no, it's not the Eighth Amendment is not meant to apply to school children. It's meant to apply only to people in the penal system. It protects prisoners, in prisons from cruel and unusual punishment, but it doesn't protect students from this kind of beating. And the court explained that instead you can sue the teacher that hits you, if negligence or excessive force is used in most states. Most state laws, in Texas is no exception. That's one of the only areas where an individual educator can successfully be sued for civil liability for injuries that happen. They could also be gone after criminally if what they did is excessive. But I haven't bothered to look at the research about the effectiveness of that, because I just don't believe. I guess I'm guilty of not digging into the research, because I'm predisposed to not think that it's a very effective method.
The Ingram versus Wright case decided in 1977 by the Supreme Court that corporal punishment in public schools did not fall within the scope of, quote, cruel and unusual punishments clause of the Eighth Amendment, and did not violate the 14th Amendment's guaranteed of procedural due process. And more importantly, the assistant principal apparently held the student's arms, Solomon Barnes, and the assistant to the principal held the student's legs. And while he was restrained, they used a paddle to hit the student more than 20 times.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, it was awful. I have my students read that case, and it's shocking to their conscious, collective conscious. And, and I advise them, I say, if you ever are interviewing for a job and you find out that's going to be part of your job description, I urge you to look for a different job. You asked me if I've ever had to do that. I did get asked once when I was a younger man, just say a young man, not younger, because I'm no longer young. But when I was first learning and in my apprenticeship as a budding school administrator, one of my mentor administrators asked if I would mind burning off a detention, and that was a practice where a kid had a detention, and he didn't want to do the detention. He'd rather just take the lick and be done with it. And he asked if I'd be willing to do that. And I said, if it's all the same, if it's okay, I would rather not. And they didn't pressure me to do that. That district where I was interning, they allowed it. But the other thing I would say about it, Pete, is there is a lot of data that I've looked at about the significant racial disproportionality of beatings that occur in schools, and students of color are more than twice as likely to be beaten at school by school employees than white students. And some of that is because the great majority of the corporal punishment incidents occur across those deep South states. But there's a lot of talk about disproportionality and discipline, and the phrase "the school to prison pipeline" has been coined some time ago, and normally those discussions are focused on what we call exclusionary discipline techniques, suspensions, and expulsions.
Yeah, those are much more common. That's where the meat of the issue of the topic of the debate is. Yeah. Are they disproportionately disciplined in terms of suspensions and detentions and other types of punishments and consequences for behavior than white students? Not are they hit disproportionately, which is also a fine and fair question, but it may be a red herring for the bigger, larger, more important issue, I guess.
But that's out there, and when we talk about corporal punishment, we don't talk about it a lot in my groups, because I frankly don't. I don't ever expect to hear from any of my students that they will, when I check back with them, years later when they're on the job, that they're engaging in administering corporal punishment. So that's always kind of my takeaway is it's not useful. It's not helpful. It's dangerous for you legally. It's dangerous for the kid. And there are better ways to go about things. If I had the wherewithal at the state level, I'd ban it at the state level. But I'm always surprised though, because there's always occasionally there are these students that will raise their eyebrows a little bit, and a lot of people have been raised with this spare the rod, spoil the child mentality, and that's still out there, and so but that doesn't mean that the state should be hitting kids, right? Even if you believe that that's something that a parent should or shouldn't do, I don't think it follows that the state should be engaged in that.
Right. It's one thing for a parent. It's something completely different for the state to allow it to happen. All right. Well, listen, I'll let you go, but I appreciate today's lesson. We're just here at the beginning, learning from you, and there's going to be a lot, obviously, more to talk about, so many more topics. But I'm hoping listeners, parents, community members will get more engaged in their local. What do you have to say about that? What's the PSA on parents and community members getting engaged? And in some ways, I'm almost wary of it because I don't want parents to tell schools and teachers what to do. But obviously, I had parent-teacher conference today with my daughter's teacher. I love having a relationship with a teacher and knowing about how my girls are doing and asking a bunch of questions. I didn't tell her Italian teacher today how to teach Italian.
Yeah. You need to engage. Parents need to engage. Community members need to engage. You need to go to board meetings. You need to stand up and speak at a board meeting if you feel strongly about a subject. But the operative word is engage, and you're not engaging if you're yelling and screaming and not listening, and you're not interested in working together to find solutions to issues that are happening in your school district. If it's all about yelling and threatening and coercion in the boardroom, I don't really call that meaningful engagement. But you can make a difference by going and talking to your school board. School boards do listen when parents come and stand at the podium and talk. Parents don't think they're being listened to because the laws don't allow board members to respond and engage with the parent there unless the topic they're speaking about is on the agenda. Those are, the open meeting laws say that you can't go back and forth with a parent on something that's not posted on the agenda item. So parents, you don't expect to get a response right then and there if you go speak. But know that your voice matters, that your voice matters. All the stakeholders' voices matter. And your administrators, your teachers, your board members should all recognize that you have a liberty interest in participating and being a partner in this project of educating your child. And don't be afraid to do that. But understand that partnership is a two-way process, and you don't get everything you want. And just because you say it doesn't make it necessarily so. But if you engage and let the school district and let the board members and let people know how you feel about things, the end result will always be better, I think.
Well,
so that would be my PSA for public engagement.
I like it a lot. Well done. Dr. Watt Lesley Black Jr. to SMU. Great to have you listening, and even more importantly now, great to have you contributing to the conversation. I learned a lot. I really appreciate it.
Pete, thank you. The pleasure was mine, and it was, again, just an honor to be on the line talking with you and join the roundtable the sort of the virtual roundtable you've assembled of people that I really like and respect and admire. So thanks for the opportunity, sir.
That's awesome. Great to have such a smart dude out here listening and now talking to me. Thank you so much for your time, and congratulate. This really is the pinnacle of your career. I hope that you will call your whole family and let them know what transpired today in your life.
Everybody, I've made it. I have arrived.
That's it.
I've gotten on the Pete Dominic show. Thank you, Pete.
All right.
I appreciate you, sir.
And there you go, for the first time ever on the show, Dr. Watt Lesley Black Jr. of SMU in Texas, the Simmons School of Education and Human Development. It was great to get him in conversation, and it was really cool whenever you get someone who's been listening to the program for a long time and really likes it and can jump in and join the conversation. So please go let him know that you heard him here on the show. That'd be fantastic. He is actually on Twitter. You can follow him at Watt Black. That's 2 T's, at Watt Black, Dr. Watt Black Jr. All right. Well, that's all I've got for you today. S.E. Cupp, Dr. Watt Black Jr., and I am very happy that you listened to today's program. I hope you took a lot away from it, as I did, and I look forward to talking to you tonight about any of it or all of it or none at all at the Stand Up Happy Hour Hangout. If you're a subscriber, you should be getting an email every day, unless for some reason you opted out, you monster. And it includes a picture of vitamin N. Send me your photos of vitamin N, especially here in autumn. The standupwithpete@gmail.com. And you will get a link in that email as well where to join us at 8 p.m. Thursday. That's tonight if you're listening on Thursday. And every Thursday, unless I tell you otherwise. You can also get access to our Discord group, which is awesome. It's always great benefit to be a stand-up member. You're never alone because someone is experiencing what you're experiencing some way, somehow. So join up. Thank you very much. You guys are the greatest. John Carroll, take us out. We'll talk to you tomorrow right here on Stand Up.
Only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw the land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up. Stand up. Got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand